If you got a Bible, go to Luke chapter 5. That's where we're going to be. If you were not with us last week, or maybe you just need a refresher of where we've been, last week as we started the year, we started a new series called The Way. And the heart of the series is oftentimes, particularly in this time of year, the press that people feel is, I need to start setting goals for 2026 or resolutions for 2026. There are things that I need to accomplish. And in the desire to accomplish those things, whether they're spiritual or not, they become a more performance-driven reality than they do this kind of rhythm of faithfulness that the Lord would call us into. And so the way of Jesus is different than just what can you accomplish on your to-do list. Or if you're not a type A personality, the thing that you should be putting the things that you should be doing on, that's called a to-do list. And so like maybe I don't want us to reduce our faith to can we accomplish all the things. And so even last week we spent time talking about there's a reality that Jesus' identity was based in who he was before it was based in any activity that he did. And we'll continue over the next several weeks to begin to explore that theme of what does it look like to flow in this rhythm of faithfulness that's not just about accomplishment, but it's about identifying with Jesus. And so with that in mind, our main idea this morning is the way leads us down the path of the unexpected. And so I often think about, as I think about life, like the weird things that you begin to identify about yourself that you thought was true of everybody else, but you realize as you get older, oh, you didn't do that growing up? And so I was thinking about that because next week in our message, we'll be talking a little bit about how Jesus chose his disciples and the way that he thinks through communities. And I'm just going to give you a preview of coming attractions. I really love the show Golden Girls. And I didn't realize that was a weird thing until I said it out loud, right? And so another thing is, like, when I was younger, I can remember in our senior year yearbook, like, writing what we wanted to be, right? And there's some people that wanted to work for NASA, and some people that wanted to be the president, and some people that wanted to be whatever. And I said, I want to be a Renaissance man. And, like, that's just peak nerddom, right? Like somebody should have stopped me. Like, I should have had some good friends that would have been like, nobody knows what that means. And so what I was thinking was like Renaissance people like Leonardo and Michelangelo, like they weren't just one thing. Like they were inventors, but they were also painters. They were writers. They had all of these skills. Like they couldn't just put themselves in one box. And so the answer was right, but it was really nerdy the way that I said it. But you need to know that like I was really enamored with things like that. And so in particular, like Michelangelo, like he was my dude. Like Michael's in his name. He reminded me of Michelangelo from the Ninja Turtles, right? Like there was just so much upside to him. But there was this thing about Michelangelo that when he would be working on a thing, then when he was done, he was done. Like it took him a really long time to get done painting the Sistine Chapel. One, because it was a very arduous thing to do. But part of it was like he got to certain points and he was like, no, I'm good. And then they're like, no, we actually commissioned you to do the whole thing, bro. And he's like, nah, I think that's it. I think it's right. And it was just kind of this unexpected, everybody's expecting him to keep doing the thing. And he's like, no, I think I'm good. I say that because I think Jesus got a little bit of Michelangelo to him. Or maybe Michelangelo got a little bit of Jesus to him. And I think this text helps us to see that. Let me pray and then we'll jump in. So, Father, I do think you are leading us in a path that is not the ordinary path. I think that if the definition of our identity is that we are people of the way, people that follow after the footsteps of Jesus, then it will lead us to uncommon places and uncommon people and uncommon opportunities that may look weird or not make sense to our human value systems. Lord, I pray that because we long to be with you, that we would walk with you in it. It's in your matchless name I pray. Amen. Luke chapter 5, starting in verse 12, says this. While he was in one of the towns, a man was there who had leprosy all over him. He saw Jesus, fell face down, and begged him, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Reaching out his hand, Jesus touched him, saying, I am willing, be made clean. And immediately leprosy left him. Then he ordered him to tell no one. But go show yourself to the priest and offer what Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them. Now, I think there's a lot here. Obviously, we spent some time in Luke last week looking at chapters 2, 3, and even the beginning of 4, and we've jumped a little bit ahead. And so even the towns that they're talking about, he's in the towns of Galilee. This is after Jesus has been tempted, after Jesus has preached his message in the synagogue out of Isaiah, and like we're beginning to see the ministry of Jesus take form and take shape. And this man comes to him, and he has this disease, leprosy. Now, in the scriptures, that language of leprosy is not as narrow as probably the way that we would define it today. It actually is just a range of skin ailments and diseases that people might be suffering from. But what you need to know about leprosy is it wasn't just a physical condition, it was a social condition. The tension with leprosy was it was highly contagious. And so because it was highly contagious, it had some ramifications. And one of those ramifications was social, that you could not be around people because for fear of getting other people to have the same issue that you had. And so that was a sense of being physically and ceremonially or ritually unclean, literally people would be declared unclean if they weren't seeing progress in the process of their disease becoming whole and forced to be away from people for a period of time. But then it wasn't just the social ramification, but there was a spiritual stigma behind leprosy. Maybe the best way I can explain it is this, that the way to think about the way that God operated with his people was that God is holy. And oftentimes when you hear the word holy, what you think is God is morally pure. He does not steal his neighbor's trash can. And that is true. But it's also bigger than that. It's this idea that God is unique or separate or completely other. This is not just one of the characteristics of God. This is the summations of the characteristics of God that makes him very different than us. And out of that holiness flows his power, his life, his strength. All that is good flows out of that holiness. But the reality about that holiness, the challenge about that holiness, is that he is other, and therefore we are not the same as him. And so the Bible Project would describe it this way, like think about the sun, and the sun provides life, but the closer you get to the sun, the more things melt, which is why nobody's figured out how to take a vacation on Venus. And so there's this sense of, as you get closer to the holiness of God, the more impure that you are, the more dangerous that it is. And so for somebody to be a leper, there is this idea that somehow you are unclean physically, that you have touched something, or your body is corroding and experiencing the fall, the death, the decay of the body, and that shows something, and that's a problem. But there was also this spiritual stigma to it that people often thought, well, you got there because you did something to get there. And so now you've got this tension of this man who has this socially distancing, sin-stigmating disease that he is now coming towards Jesus. And as he walks towards Jesus, it's amazing because what he says to him is deeply profound. We're pretty early in the text of Luke. Luke has done a lot of work to tell us that Jesus is the Son of God, but I'm not sure that anybody else knows that. And so people still think that John might be the Messiah. People are still trying to figure out where Jesus lines up. And this guy shows up and he says, Lord. And I don't even know that he is saying like Lord in terms of you are God, but certainly this term of respect. But he says to him, Lord, if you're willing, will you make me clean? I want you to hear the nature of the question. He doesn't say, hey, I'm not sure if you can do this. Like if you walked into my office and you said, hey, Mike, I'm struggling with my finances. I am $1 million in debt. I'd be like, we should pray right now because I am not able. Don't even ask me if I'm willing. We can't get there. He doesn't bother to ask Jesus, is he able? He just assumes that he can do it. But he says, are you willing to do it? And then maybe more astounding than the guy's boldness to go to Jesus with this socially distancing disease and say, hey, I know you can do this. Are you willing to do it? Is Jesus' response to him. I've told you that this disease is highly contagious, that it's got stigma behind it. And Jesus reaches out and touches him. And he says, I'm willing. And so I just, like Jesus doesn't have to touch you to heal you. Like Jesus has done some really profound stuff that he didn't touch people to do. Like he didn't do chest compressions on Lazarus to bring him back from the dead. In fact, Luke chapter 17, this is going to be familiar to you because last year during Celebration Sunday, I actually preached this text, but Luke 17 is the story of 10 guys who are lepers. And Jesus is walking on his way to Jerusalem, and here's what Luke would say. While traveling to Jerusalem, he passed between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, the men with leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and raised their voices, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." And when he saw them, he told them, "Go and show yourselves to the priest." And while they were going, they were cleansed. So it feels like they're on one side of the street, and they're like, "Hey, Jesus!" And Jesus is like, "What?" He doesn't touch them. In fact, it's actually pretty rare when Jesus touches people, but when he does, it means something. And so let me give you some instances just that Luke would highlight. And so Luke chapter 7, Jesus is outside of a town called Nain, and there's a funeral going on. And as the funeral's going on, there's a widow who has lost her son. The casket is open, and Jesus walks up, puts his hand on the casket, stops the funeral, and raises the kid from the dead. And then in Luke chapter 13, there's a woman who has been bent over with this disabling spirit for 13 years, and she's at the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and Jesus walks up, and he could have just said, "Hey, woman, you're healed, you're whole." But he touches her, and then she's able to straighten up, and she's healed. This is not a healing circumstance, but it's interesting. There's a moment in Luke chapter 18 where there's a group of parents that are bringing their kids to Jesus, and and Jesus is touching people's babies, and the disciples start rebuking people because the disciples know, don't touch little kids because you're going to get what they got. No, that's not why the disciples do that. Some of you are like, oh, disciples might have been right. The reason that they do that is because they feel like it's this intrusion because they are not significant to gather Jesus' attention, but Jesus is embracing them and touching them. Or maybe this one will blow your mind. In the garden, when Judas betrays Jesus, Peter is not Zorro. He's not great with his sword. And so aiming for this dude's head, he ends up cutting off his ear, and Jesus grabs the guy's ear and touches him and heals him. It seems like every time Jesus slows down to touch and heal, is Jesus entering in and embracing something that we would typically avoid. We would avoid death. We would avoid insignificance. We would avoid our opposition and our enemies. But somehow he's entering in with this level of compassion to things that most of us would not want to be close to. Jesus heals him. And he gives him 3 commands. Tell no one. That's confusing. We'll talk about that in a moment. Go to the priest. Show yourself, and then sacrifice whatever Moses tells you to do. And so if you were if you're doing a reading the Bible in a year plan, I'm doing that right now. I've never done that in my life. And so I've always been like, why would you do that? Like, you can't go deep. I'm just lazy. That's really what the answer was. So I'm doing that right now. And so here in a few weeks, I'll be in Leviticus. And so when you get to Leviticus and you're like, why are there so many instructions about killing things? Leviticus 13 and 14 in particular, it's about if you have a skin disease, this is what you need to do. And so there are multiple parts to it that you go and you show yourself to the priest, but in addition to showing yourself to the priest, that you're also meant to sacrifice 2 doves, or 1 dove, and the other dove was covered in the blood of the first dove, and they also sprinkled you for 7 days to make you clean. And then there was a sin offering that was offered, or a guilt offering that was offered as part of your cleansing process. And so what Jesus is telling him to do is out of the Old Testament, out of the law of Moses, that you're supposed to give this sacrifice to as part of your cleansing process. And then verse 15 would say, but the news about him spread even more, and large crowds would come together to hear him and be healed of their sicknesses. Yet he, being Jesus, often withdrew to deserted places and prayed. There's no clear passage in time. The way I've often read this text is, man, why is that dude snitching? Jesus told you not to tell, and you weren't told. I actually don't know if he told anybody. I don't know if he went to the priest and the priests were so astounded that this man was healed and they didn't know how it happened that they began to tell people in the community, hey, did you know that John that was always been battling with leprosy? Sorry if your name's John, I'm not talking about you. But John, who has always had leprosy, that all of a sudden that he is healed and we don't know how it happened. He said he talked to this Jesus guy and all this happened. Or maybe after the 8 days of purification that he entered back into his community and his family and with his people, and they were so glad he was back, and they're like, how did this happen? All of a sudden, people are finding out about Jesus. I actually have no idea how it happened that other people knew, and I actually don't even think that's Luke's point. I think Luke is actually tying to something bigger in his book. Because over the last couple of chapters, what keeps coming up is that Jesus keeps doing things, and people keep hearing about them and getting so excited that they want more of Jesus. Let me give you some examples. Luke chapter 4, verse 14 is just after where we ended last week, where he's been tempted by Satan. And now he enters back into Galilee in the power of the Spirit, and news about him spread throughout the entire vicinity. He was teaching in their synagogues and being praised by everyone. People were flocking to hear him. There were crowds gathering around him. Or Luke chapter 4, verse 36, amazement came over them all, and they were saying to one another, what is this message? This is just after he has preached out of the book of Isaiah, and they're trying to figure out, man, who gave you the authority to say this? For he commands the unclean spirits with authority and power, and they come out, and news about him begin to go out to every place in the vicinity. Or Luke chapter 4, verse 40 through 43 would say this: when the sun was setting, all those who had anyone sick with various diseases brought them to him. And so this is just after he healed Peter's mother-in-law. I'm not even going to make a mother-in-law joke there. I don't got time. And as he laid his hands on each one of them, he healed them. Also, demons were coming out of many and shouting and saying, you are the Son of God. But he rebuked them and would not allow them to speak because they knew he was the Messiah. When it was day, so the next day, he went out and made his way to a deserted place. But the crowds were searching for him. They came to him, and he tried to keep him from leaving them. But he said to them, it's necessary for me to proclaim the good news about the kingdom of God to other towns also, because I was sent for this purpose. See what's happening is that Luke is tying to this bigger idea that people keep hearing about Jesus, whether Jesus intends that or whether the people intend that or not. And crowds are growing around him. People are coming. And what keeps happening is that Jesus keeps trying to avoid that. Thus, verse 16 would say to us, and often he withdrew and went somewhere else to pray. Often he was trying to back away from the press and the popularity and the need and the desire. And so I don't know why he told him to be quiet. It might have been because it wasn't the right timing. It might have been because he knew the guy was going to tell him anyways. It might have been because he was trying to press away. But for some reason, Jesus didn't want to be in the middle of the fanfare and the excitement and the celebration of what everybody wanted to do in that moment. He wanted to press away and get with his Father. So I wrote it this way. Why? Because I think the approval of people is not equivalent to the access to God. I don't know everybody's story, but I know my own. Way too much of my life has been spent trying to get people to approve me, to like me, to celebrate me. And that's both in person and online. Like if you get that one more like, if you get that one more person to celebrate and say, you're doing something good. And so oftentimes we just jump on that treadmill of trying to please people and getting nowhere. And that's very different than having access to God. Yeah. And when Jesus had to pick between the two, what he chose was to withdraw and go be with the Father. So I think this is important. Here's the complexity of the way. Jesus often pursues what we avoid and often avoids what we pursue. Because in those first several verses, man, there's a lot of reasons to avoid that guy with leprosy. There's a lot of reasons to avoid that situation. There's not a lot of fanfare in that. And Jesus leans into that with compassion. There's not a lot of reason to interrupt that funeral. There's not a lot of reason to take the person who's trying to turn you over to the high priest and make sure that you are seen as a criminal. There's not a lot of reason to lean in with compassion and heal that person. And yet Jesus pursues what we would often avoid. And then Jesus tries to avoid what we would often pursue. Because let's just be real. If you or I had healed somebody with leprosy, we would hire somebody to walk around with a camera and film our next thing. I mean, there are literally people who it is their job to just let you watch what they do all day long and have millions of people following them doing it. And I think to myself, how in the world are you getting away with do that? And could you tell me how to do that also? Like if I could make some money driving my kids to school? Because we want to be seen. We want to be approved. We want to be valued. And somehow Jesus is stepping away from that and saying, like, that's not worth it to me. I'm going to shift gears. This message is going to feel incomplete. When I was studying this week and I was preparing, I was like, the next story in this text is a story of a man who is paralyzed, and it's also in the book of Mark, and his friends carry him up on the roof. They cut a hole in the roof, and they lower him down so that Jesus can heal him, and Jesus forgives that dude of his sin, and everybody's like, what in the world? Who do you think you are? Like, you can't, only God can forgive people of sins. And Jesus is like, huh? And he's like, okay, just so you know that I have this power, I'm going to heal him also. And the link that I was going to make for you is this pattern of unexpected things that Jesus is doing. He's being unexpectedly compassionate. He's responding in an unexpected way to the press of the crowd, and he's exhibiting this unexpected authority. I'm not going to preach that point. I mean, I just told you, but I'm not going to preach that point. Just imagine that was really awesome. It's going to feel incomplete because I want to get back to our main idea, and I want to give us an opportunity to respond. The way leads us down the path of the unexpected. You know what's really interesting is I don't think it's accidental that little phrase in verse 16 where it says that Jesus often withdrew. It was his common practice to withdraw and pray, is before he steps into healing this man, forgiving his sins and healing this man. I think Jesus was good at cultivating what was counterintuitive. And so I wrote it this way: Jesus' pattern of doing the unexpected wasn't accidental. It was built on the consistency of his time with the Father. I read in a book called Blink that one of the things that happens with law enforcement officers is they spend so much time training to shoot that when things get chaotic, everything slows down for them, and they can narrow in and focus on the most important thing if they're in a situation where there's gunfire going on. They're trained to do that. And so they can push out all of the other distractions and lock in on what's most important and see in the midst of the fray and aim accurately. They see correctly because of how much energy they've put into being able to do that well. I think that's important because I wonder if that's true for us also. That if we took the time to cultivate the ability to see as God would have us see, if we created spaces in our life, if we withdrew from the press of the noise of the crowd and the voices and everything that's trying to point us a direction and do a thing, if we backed up enough to have space with the Lord and actually hear his thoughts, would we be able in the midst of the fray to see the thing that matters? And so then when it comes time to be standing with that person that needs to hear a word from the Lord, that we're able to do that thing, not because we knew it was coming, but because we spent time with the Father and we have his heart. And so when we see the world as he sees it, and we can push out all the other stuff and just see the thing that he wants us to see. And so then when the guy gets lower that, yes, you need to heal his broken body, but also you need to attend to his broken soul. That, yes, this man who has leprosy that you could heal from afar off as he's talking to you, but this time you need to reach and touch him to show your compassion. That something shifts because you've cultivated this ability to see counterintuitive to the way the rest of the world sees. You pursue what the world avoids, and you avoid what the world pursues. I just want to ask you, do you have space in your life like that? Are you able to withdraw from the crowd? Are you able to withdraw from the physical crowd that wants your attention and wants to press you and be things? Hey, I'm going to give you a spiritual gift. No is a full sentence. And so when people invite you to a thing and that thing is rivaling with the other things that you say you value, you can say no and you don't have to explain it. Can you push back from the digital crowd? Because I actually think the digital crowd is a little bit more invasive. Because you don't have to be in any time or particular space. And in fact, the danger of the digital crowd is you might be physically somewhere, but digitally somewhere else. You might be sitting at your desk on the clock, but you're really on Instagram trying to figure out your vacation. Don't raise your hand like, that's me. Your boss might be in here. I'm not trying to get you in trouble. There's this danger of of the digital crowd shaping the way that you think and what you do. And then what you say, you want to keep feeding the crowd so that they'll like it, so that other people will see it. And I'm not even saying that social media is bad. I'm also not saying it's good. But there's this press of the crowd that we spend so much time in that I don't think that we could hear or see God's thoughts for us. Do you have spaces in your life where you're cultivating that? I'd like to offer you at least one. The reason, month after month, week after week, that we invite you into spaces of prayer like Dwell is to cultivate a space where you get to be with the Lord and push out the distractions that you could cultivate the counterintuitive. In fact, this month we're going to jump into John chapter 15, and here's what the start of John chapter 15 is about. Abide with the Lord. Like abide is one of those words. Here's how I would describe abide in a secular way. It's when you're dating somebody and they give you a drawer at their house. Like they plan for you to be there for a while. Like it's that idea of you're not rushing past the Lord, but you're creating space to move in and be there with him. That's where we cultivate the counterintuitive. Now I'm not done. I'm going to come back and I'm going to push us towards something in addition to what I just said. But I want to pause and I want to come to the Lord's table together. So let me pray and then we'll enter into that. So Jesus, I want to be faithful to walk in the way. I want to be available to you that when you're building this pattern of the unexpected, that I'm on my toes and able to go where you're leading because I've spent enough time with you that I can follow you closely. Help me do that well. Help us do that well. Help us to be determined, resolute to carve out space to be with you, to push back from the crowd, to push back from the approval and the acclamation and the time with people. Would you give us the ability to step back and say, but to be with you, to have access to you is so much more valuable than the approval of the crowd. That we might see specifically from day to day where you're calling us to be, calling us to move on, when people are begging us to do more and we say, hey, I've got to back up because the Lord has called me into something in addition to this. Like, would you give us that sense of what you're doing? It's in your matchless name I pray. Amen. Thanks so much for checking out this message from Kings Harbor. We would love to connect with you. If you go to kingsharbor.org/hello and fill out a short connect card, that allows us the opportunity to follow up with you. Also, if this message has been a blessing to your life, we believe that the Lord wants to rule and reign in every part of who we are. That means our time, our talent, our treasure. And so if this has been a blessing, we would ask that you would consider contributing back to the ministries of Kings Harbor so we can continue to bless and help people in the same way that we hope we have done for you. With that in mind, we want you to know that our heart towards you and our heart towards the world around us is that we want to be a love-forward people. And we're praying that you would join us in that.